Now let's kind of cap our discussion about groups with a best practices. And this is a complete reiteration of everything I said, especially in that AD Groups Basics animation. But this is what you need to remember. If you can get this in your head and follow it, this will help you just skip through most of the questions on the exam about groups and group memberships and permissions and so forth. First of all, if you remember in the Group Basics video where I did that animation, I talked about AGLP. Well, now we've gone since that point, we've talked about the domain local group as opposed to just the plain local group and so forth. And so this is what you're going to end up with. If you're in a single domain trying to organize your users into groups and use those groups to control security to resources, you need to remember AGDLP. You can even still remember AGLP. It's just that the local group is actually a domain local. So AGDLP. Now what this means is your accounts or your users are members of global groups. So you're going to create global groups that segregate your users based on business role, and you're going to put them into global groups. Then those global groups become members of domain local groups that you have assigned permissions to. A, accounts go into G, global groups go into domain local groups, and domain local groups have permissions assigned to them. So if you can remember this, you can draw these questions out in diagram form on the exam and figure them out. Now, if you're in a multiple domain environment, we're going to add a universal group in there. Accounts, which are users, are once again members of global groups, and these global groups are members of universal groups. Keep in mind, universal groups can be created in a domain, but they're seen throughout the forest. So I can just simply add global groups into these universal groups, and then the domain local groups contain these global groups, universal groups, and we, same thing, apply permissions. So across multiple domains, just read about universal groups. Now go out there and do some reading on universal groups if you haven't used them. They can be somewhat confusing. We've talked about them a little bit here, but just follow this, AGDLP and AGUDLP, and you will be able to figure out what they're asking you on the exam. Now, the big thing that you got to watch on the exam also, you do not ever want to apply permissions to an individual user. You only apply them to domain local groups, and then you work this model, this AGLDLP or AGUDLP model down to finally get permissions out there. Because what this gives you is at some point in the future, when you hire a new person, you will simply drop them into the global groups that best describes what their business role is. If you hire somebody from marketing, you drop them in the marketing global group, and that global group is a member of all the various domain local groups that need permissions for all your marketing people, and you just gave them permissions. If you ever move that person to another department, say accounting, you just simply move his user account from the marketing global group to the accounting global group, and you just changed all of his permissions, and you know you've got it done. There's best practices. Burn this into your brain. Draw some diagrams, play with it, make sure it makes sense, own this, and you can just kind of work your way through every one of the questions on the exam, no problem.